3682.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3682, a bill to designate the community-based outpatient clinic of the Department of Veterans Affairs located at 1961 Premier Drive in Mankato, Minnesota as the Lyle C. Pearson Community-Based Outpatient Clinic.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn, and the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Walls, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks on H.R. 3682.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 3682, which is sponsored by my good friend and colleague and fellow committee member on the Veterans Affairs Committee, Representative Tim Walz from Minnesota. H.R. 3682 would name the VA Community-Based Outpatient Clinic in Mankato, Minnesota, the Lyle C. Peterson Community-Based Outpatient Clinic. Lyle Peterson was a World War II prisoner of war who received the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with Clusters, and the Purple Heart for his service. He was also a lifelong public servant, serving as the Disabled American Veterans National Commander from 1975 to 1976. Recognizing Lyle's service and his sacrifice by naming the CBOC in Mankato after him is a fitting and appropriate honor. I'm grateful to Representative Walz for sponsoring the legislation and urge all of my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 3682. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume. I want to thank my colleague and friend from Colorado for his kind words and his work on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm proud to serve with him. I rise today in support of 3682. Designates the Department of Veterans Affairs Community-Based Outpatient Clinic in Mankato, Minnesota as the Lyle C. Pearson Community-Based Outpatient Clinic. Lyle Pearson was the true definition of American hero. Through his lifelong dedication to service, both in and out of uniform, Lyle left a profound and everlasting impact on southern Minnesota and this country as a whole. Lyle served in the skies over Europe as a B-17 pilot with the 15th Air Force during World War II. He completed 50 combat missions over occupied territory. In December 1944, Lyle's aircraft was shot down over Italy. Surviving the horrors of the shoot-down, Lyle was a prisoner of war from December 44 till May of 1945. For his actions in combat as a POW, Lyle was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with Clusters, and the Purple Heart. Like so many of his colleagues, the distinguished service that he served in uniform might have only been outpaced by what he did after he came back home. After the war, Lyle rejoined his wife on their family farm, but his desire to serve was strong. Beginning in 1957, Lyle administered programs for Nicollet County Juvenile Court and Nicollet County Court Services, first as the Chief Probation Officer, then as Director of Court Services. He helped turn around countless lives of troubled youth in his time at Nicollet County, earning Minnesota Corrections Officer of the Year in 1969. One of Lyle's biggest impacts was helping his fellow veterans. He served his entire life helping other veterans, and as you heard from my colleague, he served as the National Commander of the Disabled American Veterans. He also spent 49 years as the adjutant of his local chapter. He dedicated over a half a century of service to the St. Peter State Hospital, was a 4-H club leader, and was active with his church throughout his entire life. Through all of this, Lyle was a husband, the father of 7 children, and a stalwart pillar of our community. Lyle's dedication to duty, his community, and this country reflected upon himself and was the finest keeping of the ideals of service, selflessness, and giving, making him the ideal for the Mankato Community-Based Outpatient Clinic that will serve so many of our fellow veterans. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an honor to work with my colleague, Representative Walz, on this fine piece of legislation honoring someone very deserving of this honor and the naming of this clinic. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would urge all of our members and colleagues to support H.R. 3682, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 3682? Those in favor, say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.